So now that Susan's back, I'd like to talk about our Israel trip. And in 1976, a group of us went to Israel, and Susan and I were among those people who were fortunate to have gone. We went to Israel, Egypt, and Greece.
And Jordan and Syria.
And Jordan and Syria. So why don't you come up and sit there with me, and we'll talk about those trips.
Shalom.
This is joining me is Susan Thomas. She is also one of Paul's students and also my sister. And we've known her for 40 years. And Susan is a master musician and a beautiful singer, an incredible singer. And Paul often would call her and ask her to introduce his lectures by singing and set the atmosphere, because especially he would ask her to sing The Holy City, which was one of his favorites. And I remember one time when she was pregnant with her first child, and she was singing The Holy City, and it was incredible. It was just, I think you were about ready. It was like a month before you had Leah, and it was incredible. So,
I just want to tell you one thing. David used to cry every time she sang that. He loved that. So
who did?
She loved
David.
David, he did, yeah. I did too. I've always felt so. It just changes the whole atmosphere of the room when Susan sings The Holy City. It's just exquisite. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, the first thing that happened was...
I'm laughing already because that trip's full of a lot of laughter. It just brings it right back as long ago as that trip was.
Just before we left for the trip, Susan and Billy got married. So this was their honeymoon. So we all went on their honeymoon with them.
30 people.
Right.
I'm going to change the room assignments.
That's right. Susan and I were going to room together, and then I didn't have a roommate. So the first thing that happened was this happened. In Greece.
We went to Greece first.
We went to Greece,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Susan fell and broke her toe.
I slipped in Greece.
Slipped in Greece. And then her new husband tripped over her and stepped on her.
That's what broke it. I don't think it was the rock. I think it was the second incident. Yeah.
So...
Well, meanwhile, back at the farm, actually, it was in Greece.
It was in Greece, okay.
We were at the Parthenon. That's where this happened. And there's a lot of rocky areas there and stuff. So I remember Billy and I got in this taxi. Fortunately, some of them speak more English than we do Greek, which we spoke no Greek, And we went to this doctor's office and they took the x-ray. That's how they found out. But they wanted us to go then to some hospital for some cast or something. But we had Dr. Bill Kelly with us, a chiropractor. And so he wrapped it a certain way. And then they had a healing service. Greatly accelerated the healing, because a couple days later I'm walking and crawling around in the Great Pyramids and I'm not feeling any pain. So clearly there was great acceleration of the healing. Yeah, it was very powerful.
And so then...
Paul led that service.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And did you ever get your toe x-rayed again? Or,
No.
No. Okay, you just walked.
Forgot about it.
Yeah,
just
forgot that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we were, Paul did a reading in the pyramid. He got into the sarcophagus of the Great Pyramid, and he did a reading there. And we all stood around in a circle and said a prayer, and there were, Susan and I saw two people who weren't there.
We were doing the Om.
Oh, we do the Om, okay.
Okay, in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. Powerful energy, as you can imagine. It was really amazing. And I had my eyes closed, and I suddenly heard different voices. That's why I opened my eyes, and I saw a tall man and a short man in Egyptian robes. So I thought, well, I wonder who they are, but it seemed perfectly natural. So I just closed my eyes and kept on.
Yeah.
And it was at least 4 months later. I had never told anyone when I don't remember who brought it up, but Sharon talked to me about it. I said, "You saw them too?"
Because they weren't there when he.
They weren't there
They
when
weren't
we
there.
finished
No.
doing what we were doing either.
Right.
So
And-
guardians, perhaps, of the temple.
Yeah, and I had an experience in the pyramid.
Yeah.
At the time, I had pretty bad asthma, and I was taking asthma pills. And when I was in the pyramid, you have to kind of, there's passages where you have to go, when you go around the things, you have to lean over. And when I was leaning over, I realized that I used to wake up in the middle of the night with an asthma attack, and that's where I was in the pyramid. And
In your dream?
in my dream, I would be in that pyramid going through those passageways, and then after that, I didn't have an asthma attack until a long time later when I started eating sweets again. But as long as because I was on a pure diet then, and as long as I stuck to the pure diet, I didn't have any more problems with asthma.
The passageways that we had to go through to get where we were going in the Great Pyramid kind of remind me of like you're going deep inside yourself, because you couldn't just walk along. Then you'd have to lean down and go for a while, and then you'd be upright again, and you'd lean down. And it was a unique physical experience just getting where you were going. But somehow it shifted your consciousness, I believe, and the veil was very thin, and all those dimensions, just there we were.
And then we both got into the sarcophagus. You got it first, after Paul's reading.
Oh, that was interesting how I got
Yeah.
into, wasn't it? Okay, normally I'll wait in the back, in the queue, like a good British person, in the queue. And I'm certainly not going to break in line, and I'm not aggressive. But I'm standing near the back of the group, and there was a man that started to get in, and he actually had his foot going in. It felt like someone else's voice came out of me and said, "I must get in there now." Oh, it just shocked my own self. And Paul immediately smiled. Come, and he's told the other person, wait till, we're going to have her get in now. And part of me, the left brain is still thinking stuff while the other part of you is going through the motion of doing what you're doing. So anyway, I had no preconceived notion of getting into this so-called sarcophagus. I knew it was not that, but when I laid in there, it was the one time in my life I've had zero fear of death whatsoever. All I was pure energy, and I've never felt this extreme before or since. It's like I barely was in there, like 2 seconds, and everything was just whirring. That's the best way I can describe it. It was as though I had this battery, like I hooked in and was being recharged. And yet it was the most natural thing, like something you remember from somewhere. But whirring and going, literally just going unconscious, going out. And Paul touched me around here. I remember his touch brought me back right here as he said a prayer. And I felt so blessed. And then it's kind of a blur, but next thing I know, Sharon and I are standing behind the stone coffer, helping other people get into it, and we didn't know where Paul went.
Yeah.
He kind of disappeared somewhere.
He left and I got in, and I had the same experience as Susan. Now Paul had explained this is an initiation chamber. It wasn't you probably know. The pyramid is not a tomb. It was an initiation chamber where people would experience that in the final initiation, they would, to become a master, they would go into the sarcophagus and they would be buried alive for 3 days, and then they would have reached the point in their spiritual growth where they could leave their bodies for those days, and that they could keep their their physical body alive and their consciousness above it, and then they were able to come back into their bodies and resume their physical life. And Paul explained that that was during Jesus' lifetime. He visited the Great Pyramid, and he went into that initiation chamber and experienced that initiation, so that when he died and was resurrected, even though his body died, he had had that experience of leaving his body for the 3 days first in that initiation chamber of the pyramid, so that he had a preview of what he was to experience with the crucifixion and the resurrection. And I'm sure there's a lot more to that than I understand, but that was the same sarcophagus that we were able to go into in that chamber. And I also had that same feeling of, that whirling feeling, and I was feeling like I was leaving my body. I think that was the first time ever that I ever had that experience. But I knew that if I didn't get up in that particular moment, I believed that if I didn't get up at a particular moment, I'd go out and I'd never come back in. So I got up and
I don't even think we realized just how kind of altered we were when we got in there, because I thought, okay, well, I'm fine, and we're walking out here now. I hit my head really hard and about almost knocked myself out because I couldn't feel where I ended. Does that make sense? We have to reacclimate to the physical, and we weren't as reacclimated as one would think. And I've heard other stories where people said they hit their heads trying to leave the chamber because they just, in fact, Lloyd said he didn't know that much happened, and then he tried to stand up, he couldn't even stand up, So I'm hearing lots of stories about how one has to take a moment to reacclimate, to what we're calling third dimension, or you're going to bump into a wall or hit your head or something. But in a way, it had to happen because perhaps I was so wide open up here, that kind of helped. Whoa, can't walk around like that yet, Looking back on it, I try to analyze what happened. It's a very unique experience.
Another thing that I had a past life memory in the Great Pyramid. I had a memory of so many years ago. It was 1976, but Paul was an initiator in the Temple of Initiation in the Great Pyramid way back, and I guess it was Atlantean times, and I was a neophyte student, and he was trying, I should have thought this out better, but I had the opportunity of going to the next level, and I was so resistant that I didn't do it. I just wouldn't allow that because I don't know, I was afraid. And so it was such a traumatic experience for me that I had lost this opportunity. I started crying and crying and crying. And the reason I'm telling you this is because through the years, when I resisted a lesson, I would remember that I had had an opportunity to have an initiation that I denied because of fear and anger and not understanding it. And so it helped me in subsequent times to be able to say, okay, I don't understand why this is happening, but I want to say yes instead of running away and leaving the fellowship because I was offended by something that was happening, and instead going through the initiation and staying to the next level, because as Paul explained, each year the fellowship itself would go through an initiation. And what had happened just before I came was all the previous people had left the fellowship and a whole new group came in. And each year, all of the people of the fellowship would leave and a whole new group would come in. And then I came and Stephen came and a couple of other people came who stayed through successive initiations rather than having the whole fellowship be wiped clear of the whole staff, which was rather traumatic, to say the least.
Yeah.
But because of that initiation, that denial of the initiation in the pyramid, that was one of the things that allowed me to stay when other people would leave. The other thing that allowed me to stay when other people would leave
42
is...
years.
You've been 42 years, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the years fly.
Okay. All right, so we get to Damascus. Paul wanted to go to Damascus, and it was not on the itinerary,
No, it was not.
but he decided we had to go to the street called Straight.
On the Syrian Airlines.
Yeah, we were on, I don't know if it's, you say it's Syrian Air, I thought it was Egypt Air. But anyhow, we were on this rickety plane, and there was this water dropping on our heads.
It was very
and the meat that they
uncivil.
served was green. And
Well, most of us didn't eat. Only
which was
person.
only one person ate it and got deathly ill.
Yeah.
But suddenly we're on this plane, and Paul tells us, pray that we go to Damascus. And suddenly we hear this announcement on the loudspeaker. We're not going to land at Amman. This plane has been diverted to Damascus. So we land in Damascus. And we go to the street called Straight.
Straight.
It's 2,000 years old.
The
They
street
always
called
called
Straight. It was
Straight
where Paul
Street.
the Apostle,
Yeah.
after his experience of being thrown off his donkey,
Uh-huh.
he went to Damascus to the street called Straight. So here we are, we're praying on the street called Straight.
And we probably looked like a bunch of dorks because we were standing there singing Amazing Grace. I mean, I look back on that now and I wonder what did people think. You know, a bunch of 20 and 30 and 40-year-old people just standing there looking terribly white and singing Amazing Grace. It's just, you know, I don't know. It was interesting. And we had an opportunity to possibly, well, just spend the night there in a hotel. And there may have been a ratio like there's 26 of us, but there were only 23 beds. But, well, okay, we could do that anyway or whatever. I must say it was good food we had. But then we didn't stay there. Paul had a psychic impression that it would not be safe, and he talked everyone, including the bus driver, into leaving Syria and driving all night on a bus. Okay, you know, it takes a little doing, but, you know, he felt very strongly. And so this happened, and I think we went to Jordan at that point. That's where we ended up, at a hotel there. But eventually, well, we found out the next morning, you know, in the news that I think it was 3 people had been killed outside the hotel. Yeah, some kind of terrorist something, and it's not good to be American when things are going wrong in the Mideast, you know. So anyway, we ended up in Jordan. Another fun story.
All right, so so we go on to Petra, and neither of us, but that was our sick day.
Half as old as time.
I was very pregnant.
You were
Rose
pregnant.
Red City, half as old as time.
The what?
The Rose Red City, half as old as time.
Half a gold.
Half as old.
Half as old as time. Petra.
That's what-
Yeah. And I was sick that day. I didn't go to Petra.
I
And,
was pregnant.
Yeah.
Pregnant sick. I couldn't get on that donkey and go down the.
yeah, I could, and I was afraid of the
Wasn't gonna
donkey when I was sick too.
It
But
was too wobbly. Yeah.
but later, when I had my reading, well, that's what I wanted. Paul said that that was one of the Essene cities in ancient times, and he didn't know that until after he got there. But he was very impressed with Petra. And in my reading later on, it said that I had been in Petra. And I asked him later, if I had been in Petra, how come I couldn't go? He said, I wasn't ready to get there yet. I couldn't have handled it at the time. I might have.
Being back there.
So I've never been to Petra. So anyway, here we are. We were in all these we were in Greece. We were all these Arabian cities. And,
And it was actually Howard Johnson's in Jordan where we stayed.
Did we?
But they run out of water routinely. They ran out of water the next morning. They didn't have any. And anyway, the next interesting part of the journey, though, was trying to get back into Israel from Jordan. We got to the border, and they said, no more buses today. But what are you going to do, sit there for 24 hours or whatever? And we've been traveling since early. It's 115 degrees in the shade. I mean, people haven't eaten, so forth and so on. So we did this prayer for everyone. Remember, Paul led this prayer.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just for us, but for, the right resolution of everything for all the people there, because there were some buses ahead of us, I think some behind, all wondering what are we going to do. And so next thing you know, they said, well, you all have to leave your luggage. We'll bring it the next day. And we're going to divide you up and put you on different buses so you can go.
And just say one other thing. Now, we said this prayer, but Paul wasn't content to leave it at that we had one woman on the trip who was very beautiful and sexy, and she was a real seductress. So he sent her to talk to the bus driver.
Oh, I didn't know that part. I didn't even know that part.
Eva. Remember Eva?
Oh, Eva. Okay. Eve. Think of Eve. Okay. Eve. Okay. She played the part well. All right. But
and the border guards.
they stuck my then husband Billy and I on a German bus. We didn't know anyone. We didn't speak German. There was only enough room for me to stand on one leg and hold on to the jacket of a guy. There wasn't even room, where they were cramming us in. And then it's going to go slow over this little bridge. And then suddenly they stopped. There was a bus of natives just ahead of us and said, no more today. Now the rest of these guys were already over there.
We went over. But we were on the same kind of bus, scrunched in, the whole thing. And it was, I'll put to bed. It was really like crossing the Jordan River into Israel, into the Promised Land.
Like getting to the Promised
we were
Land
so tired,
yes.
And it was, the whole, it was the land was parched. I must say that the only time I ever
15 degrees in the shade.
Right. The only time I wished I were a man was in Egypt, when you had to go to the toilets because there were just holes in the ground, and it's very hard. It's pretty hard for us women during that particular time. So we crossed over into the Promised Land. Only Susan didn't make it.
Some of them did.
Right.
Some of us were unavoidably detained.
Right.
So I remember we started to go down the steps of the bus to say something to the guard. And, you got to remember, we just were so trusting when we were that young.
Mm-hmm.
And they're standing there with these, I don't know what kind of guns, And I said, our group, I said in English, because I'm like, I can't speak any of the languages. I said, our group already went. They put us on this bus. And he goes, I order you to get back on the bus. And we got back on. But then he came back, he said, something about, we're calling the Red Cross and all this because they found out I was pregnant. They decided it was all true, but just use this to expedite things, because I hadn't eaten since who knows when, and I'm pregnant and I have a broken toe. I mean, they used it to the hilt. Anyway, so finally, here's what they let us do. It turned out there were 2 other women that were on another bus, and they let them and myself and Billy walk across this bridge, okay? And all I could think of, we joined arms and we're walking, and the Jordanian soldiers were watching and the Israeli soldiers were at the other end. And I thought, and it was sunset. There was this beautiful sunset. So I thought, it's kind of like 40 years in the wilderness, and look at this, and we're making it to the Promised Land finally. But because we had been detained by the Jordanians, the Israeli soldiers searched us. They had to search us. Then they stuck us on a jeep, took us back to the hotel. So you almost had gotten, they probably got to their the destination. I don't know if it was 5 or 6 o'clock, and had dinner, everything, and been in the hotel. We got there about 10 that night, or 9 or 10 that night. I'm very relieved to get there. It's like one of the things you realize when you come back here is I could walk 3,000 miles. There's no borders, and but they're very tight with it there. They check everything. It's a different world.
So it was in Jerusalem that Billy fell and broke his toe, or
No, he
sprained his ankle. Sprained his ankle.
What's with you?
And
And it was on the opposite side, so we kind of hanging on, limping along like.
so
Another healing service was necessitated.
we had another healing service, and this was in Bethlehem.
In Bethlehem.
On top of we had been taken there for to buy gifts in Bethlehem, and we got to go on top of on a roof, and we did. Paul and Dr. Kelly and all of us got in a line and gave energy to Billy, and it was amazing because it was like one star in the sky. It was really incredible.
It was so.
And then Billy got around after that too.
Yeah, he did pretty well too. So
I mean, it was incredible seeing all the sights in Israel and the tour guide. Well, at first, we weren't supposed to go to this place in Bethlehem. Because,
we did a lot of things we weren't supposed to do,
because
I think.
Paul had met this guy and he was talking to him and he took us to Bethlehem, but we were supposed to go with the original tour guide because all the tour guides get kickbacks. And so our tour guide quit because he wasn't going to get his, because we had bought all these souvenirs and he was going to get his kickback in Bethlehem. And so Paul comes the next morning and says, I am now your tour guide. But somebody else appeared because we weren't allowed to.
In Egypt, though, you would hear the tour guide talk, and then Paul would talk.
Right.
And say the rest of the real story. And the tour guide liked hearing what
And
Paul had to say.
The tour guide
because
said,
he went much further into matters, if you catch my drift.
and the tour guide said, finally, I understand the history of my own country.
Yeah.
It was really amazing.
That's,
So we get to this. So the next, the Sea of Galilee. I mean, that was my next sick day, and I was going to stay on the bus because we were all sick on this trip.
well, can I tell you?
Yeah, tell James
Mary
Marlowe.
Elizabeth was on this trip, and her brother James Marlowe. James Marlowe was so funny because this trip was like being in these places with each other and Paul. It was life-changing. But physically, it was no picnic. And so James Marlowe described the trip thusly. 7 days on a bus. I think it's something like that. 7 days on a bus. 7 days in a bathroom. And 1 day praying to get through it. But it was the best trip of my life. That's kind of.
They actually had to hire a taxi cab.
A jeep followed the bus because there were no bathrooms on the bus, and two of the guys definitely had to stop often. With the jeep, it was no easy little trip.
So we get to the Sea of Galilee, and I was going to stay on the bus because I felt awful. And Paul came and got me, and he took my hand and he said,
"Got her on the boat."
He got me on the boat. He said, I said, I didn't want to. He was doing all. I didn't want to bother him and say that I was sick. So he said to me, never forget it. He said, I'm a pipeline, not a reservoir. And he healed me.
Yeah.
That was one of the many times he healed me. I'll tell about some of the other
And
times.
Anna-Marie Denton?
Anna-Mae Denton, yeah.
She was afraid Billy and I would blow away because we were so thin. Remember, the wind was blowing up, and I think, I don't know, here I was only 105 pounds or something, and I'm pregnant, and I think Billy weighed 120. He's very thin. And so they were joking about we needed to put anchors on us because the wind was blowing.
He repeated the marriage at Cana.
He blessed
the marriage at Cana.
And what he focused on was blessing. He said blessing. Okay. I remember looking back. Yeah, he blessed us. I think he could see that we would be together a while, probably not, for the duration. but we had a reason to come together. And he focused on blessing the product of the union. You know, I remember he made the comment, and something about blessing the product of the union, you know, the child that was coming. So
another incredible experience for me on the trip, which was, we were baptized in the Jordan River.
it's cold.
And,
Chilly.
you know, I...
It chills the body, but not the soul.
Yeah, it chills the body, but not the soul. That's right.
I had come to the fellowship about a year before, and before I was at the fellowship, I was a reporter, a newspaper reporter. And I also was from a Jewish background. And so anything that had to do with Christianity was kind of alien to me. And I'll talk more about my whole introduction to the fellowship and all that kind of stuff at another time. But we were doing the baptism ceremony, and I had looked at my relationship with the fellowship as a reporter looks at learning about a story. I mean, my whole thing about coming to the fellowship is that I was going to write this great story, possibly an expose. But by this time, I was kind of getting into it and kind of enjoying it, but I still saw myself as an observer and not as a part of the group. And I was going to stand aside for the baptism and just let everybody else experience it and just, you know, maybe participate, maybe not. But Paul challenged me at that point. He said, you have to make a decision. Either you want to be a part of the fellowship or you want to be outside of it. So if you want to be observer, you'll never be a part of the group. And I had to make a decision there, and I did decide that I wanted to be a part of the group. And I did do the baptism. But that was a big defining moment for me, to make that kind of a choice. Now, I won't say that I never resisted anything after that, because I certainly did, and I certainly made a nuisance of myself many a time with those kinds of choices. But that was the first time that
much better stories.
but that was the first time he actually confronted me with what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to just watch life go before you or participate in it? Okay, it's all right, let's do the story of the healings of Leah.
Oh, little Leah.
Yeah.
When she was little.
Right.
Oh,
So
all right. One time there was some kind of a conference or I don't know what, or a lecture or something.
Carmel, yeah.
No, that one. There's been more than one. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Billy and I took Leah, and she was she couldn't have been more than 3-4 months old or something. It was in the summer.
Yeah.
She was born in May. So I'm saying maybe a couple months old. Okay. So we went to Carmel, and there was this big conference. And so we were walking from where we were staying over to where the meeting place was. And Leah was really screaming like an infant does when something hurts or they have colic or something, something. But she was like, it was really pronounced, more than I'd ever seen her. She'd never been like this. And like pushing with her feet, like afraid we'd drop her. I mean, she was like really reacting to something. Just screaming, and we're barely can hold her, trying to walk. And I'm thinking we're going to have to go see what's wrong. Now you pipe in with what's happening at the other end.
So we're in, there's a little house, and we're having a meeting in the little house. And suddenly Paul stops the meeting, and he says something's wrong. And he sends Stephen outside, because you couldn't hear anything. And Stephen has him out to see what was going on. And Susan and Billy were coming up the hill. It was like a hill carrying Leah.
Yeah. So Stephen said, come on into the house. And so Paul had me, I think, at her head, and Billy at her feet, laying her down. And he put his hands on her belly.
Yeah.
Did hands on.
And she's
at first she's
kicking her legs
and she's
pushing
just we can't figure out what's wrong. Yeah. So give her a few.
So he puts his hands on her belly, and she calms down.
Starting to calm down.
She takes her little finger and she's going, and Paul said to put to sit
Me in a
rocking chair and
just
sit,
relax and rock.
yeah, and
Yeah.
Lisa,
Yeah.
and Paul said there was an obstruction in her stomach, and he moved it.
Yeah. She had some kind of. She was very small because she
Yeah,
was
she was
5
very-
pounds 3
yeah.
ounces when she was
And
born.
then-
Yeah.
Then there was the other times that
She was only about.
Yeah.
Jenny wasn't born yet, so I would say she was around 3, and we lived at Bird Neck Apartments. And this is when there was something going on locally here, and everybody and his brother was at this thing, but I was home with her because she was sick, but she was getting worse, and her fever went up to, I don't even know, 103 or more, and all the kids that had been swimming at the neighborhood pool there had gotten all these sores in their mouth, and so she had so many she couldn't even drink water. It hurt, and in her mouth. So I had made a call. I don't know who I reached. David Solomon, I think. Yeah, I called some number of where everybody. Well, he was, and David Solomon answered, and I just said, And back then we didn't have cell phones and whatnot. What a difference! I don't know how we did what we did, but anyway, I'm giving a message to him, to Billy. I'm not sure what to do. Her fever's gone up. She's just in bad shape here, and all that. Well, next thing I know, Paul Solomon. No, Billy's coming home, but Paul Solomon and David Solomon came in the door, and Leah was in the rocking chair with me, and she immediately looked over at Paul like she knew, oh, good, he's here or something. She had that look, like, oh, okay, And he came over, and who knows what he did exactly, but she again started calming down, and then he said, I think she would enjoy chocolate milk, and the milk would actually help coat. There was something about both the chocolate and the milk that would coat these things and actually make it better in the skin in there. Plus, the child would like chocolate milk, and if you can't get her to take anything. And so I guess I don't know if they went to 7-Eleven and got the syrup, whatever. So I remember it was about 2 weeks later, and she's perfectly fine, and she's running around. And I heard her talking to the other little kids. She goes, Paul Simon said I can have chocolate milk anytime I want. It was so cute. I'll never forget it. It was just so precious.